The newspaper headline was stark. It was final. Local businessman lost at sea, presumed dead. The words were printed in bold black ink. They told a story of tragedy. A man named Patrick McDermott had gone fishing. He never came back. His boat was found empty, drifting aimlessly in the vast, unforgiving ocean. People read the story over their morning coffee. They felt a brief pang of sadness for the man and his family. It was a common story, one that played out too often along the coastline. A simple accident, a life cut short by the cruel whims of the sea. But this story was different. This story had a secret. The headline was a lie. Patrick McDermott was not lost. He was not dead. He was something else entirely. He was a ghost, but a ghost of his own making. Initially, no one suspected anything. Why would they? The story was plausible. The ocean is a dangerous place. People go missing. It was a tragedy, plain and simple. His friends and family grieved. They held a memorial service. They shared stories of the man they thought they knew. They looked out at the same ocean that had supposedly taken him and felt a profound sense of loss. The community wrapped its arms around the grieving family. They offered support. They offered condolences. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed heartbreakingly real. But then, small inconsistencies began to surface, like tiny cracks in a perfect facade. A close friend remembered Patrick talking about wanting to escape, just get away from it all. It was dismissed as simple stress at the time, a throwaway comment, but now it seemed to hold more weight. An investigator looking into his finances found irregularities. Debts were piling up. Large sums of money had been withdrawn just before his fishing trip. These were not the actions of a man planning for the future. They were the actions of a man planning an exit. The whispers started quietly. A rumor here. A suspicion there. Could he have done it? Could he have faked his own death? The idea seemed preposterous. It was something out of a movie, not real life. Yet, the more people looked, the more the official story seemed to crumble. The boat was found in remarkably good condition. His fishing gear was neatly stowed. It didn't look like the scene of a frantic life-or-death struggle. It looked staged. Private investigators were hired. They started digging deeper. They were searching not for a body, but for a living man. The hunt was on for a ghost. Who was Patrick McDermott? Before he became a ghost, he was a man of flesh and blood. To his neighbors, he was charming. He had a ready smile, a friendly wave for everyone. He was seen as a successful businessman, a pillar of the community. He coached his son's little league team. He organized neighborhood barbecues. He was the kind of person you'd be happy to live next to. He projected an image of stability and success, an image he had carefully cultivated over many years. But behind the closed doors of his perfect home, a different story was unfolding. The success was an illusion. His business was failing. He was drowning in debt. He had made promises he couldn't keep. He borrowed money from dangerous people. The pressure was immense. Every knock on the door could be a creditor. Every ringing phone could be a demand for payment. The charming smile was a mask. It hid a deep and growing desperation. He was trapped. The walls were closing in around him. He saw only one way out. He couldn't face the humiliation of bankruptcy. He couldn't face the people he owed. He couldn't bear the thought of his perfect image shattering. So he devised a plan that was as audacious as it was dark. He would not just run away. He would cease to exist. He would die. Patrick McDermott wasn't just running from his debts. He was running from himself. He was running from the man he had become. And in his place, he planned to create someone new, someone free. But freedom, he would soon learn, comes at a very high price. On the surface, Patrick McDermott seemed to have crafted the perfect American life. He lived in a respectable suburban neighborhood, a house with a neatly manicured lawn, a two-car garage. He was known as a family man, playing catch with his son in the front yard, grilling burgers at neighborhood get-togethers. A public persona of effortless confidence and affability. A quick wit. A disarming smile. Neighbors looked up to him, seen as stable and entrepreneurial. Outward appearances said everything was under control. His small lighting and sound company started with promise. He catered to local events, weddings, small concerts. For a time, business was booming. He drove a nice car, yearly family vacations. The image of prosperity cemented. Crisp suits, a confident handshake. He performed his life for an audience. The performance was convincing for a long while. That constructed image was his greatest asset. It allowed him to secure loans, build relationships, move through his world with an air of invincibility. Parties where the wine flowed freely. He was the gracious host, center of attention. The man who'd figured it out. No one saw the strain behind his eyes, the slight tremor in his hand as he raised a glass. Behind the facade, reality was starkly different. The smile, a well-practiced mask. Duality defined his existence. Living two lives, public sunshine and success, private shadows of fear and failure. Maintaining the illusion was a monumental burden, slowly crushing him. The first real cracks in Patrick's perfect world began to appear in his financial records. His business, which had once been a source of pride, was honestly just hemorrhaging money. A few bad investments coupled with increased competition had hit him really hard. He was overextended, taking out more loans to cover the old ones. He was caught in a dangerous cycle. This financial pressure began to seep into his personal life, creating these hairline fractures in his relationships. His wife noticed he was more distant, often staying late at the office, which was really just him sitting in his car, trying to figure a way out of his mess. The easygoing charm was replaced by a quiet irritability. He became short-tempered with his son, and the family dinners grew tense and silent. The mask of the happy family man was beginning to slip, revealing the anxious, desperate person underneath. To solve his immediate cash flow problems, Patrick started making riskier decisions. He began borrowing from less than reputable sources. These weren't banks with formal paperwork. They were loan sharks who operated in the shadows and demanded exorbitant interest rates. This decision marked a significant turning point. He was now entangled with dangerous individuals. The pressure intensified tenfold. The stress manifested in physical ways. He suffered from insomnia. He lost weight and dark circles formed under his eyes, which he tried to hide with a forced, hollow cheerfulness. He would brush it off as the cost of running a successful business, but it was the cost of running a failing one. He was a man being consumed from the inside out by his own secrets, trapped in a life that was built on a foundation of lies, a foundation that was now crumbling beneath his feet. Living a double life took an immense psychological toll. Patrick was constantly on edge, perpetually looking over his shoulder. Every time the phone rang, his heart would leap into his throat. Every knock at the door sent a jolt of panic through him. He became a master of deception. He would intercept the mail. He would invent elaborate stories to explain his long absences. Each lie was a brick in the wall he was building around himself, a wall that isolated him completely. The man his family knew was becoming a stranger. He was there, but he was gone. He couldn't share his burdens, because doing so would mean admitting the entire charade, that the life he had provided for them was a house of cards, about to collapse. This isolation was perhaps the heaviest burden of all. He was alone in a crowded room, screaming without making a sound. His personality began to change. The once confident man became paranoid and secretive. He started using cash, trying to leave no paper trail. He would take long, aimless drives. He was living in a constant state of high alert. This hypervigilance was exhausting. The performance was becoming less and less convincing. It was only a matter of time before the curtain fell. He felt cornered, a caged animal looking for any possible escape route. It was in this crucible of fear, shame, and isolation that the idea began to form. What if he could just disappear? What if Patrick McDermott simply ceased to exist? The thought was terrifying, but it was also seductive. It offered a clean slate. The idea of faking his own death did not arrive in a single, dramatic flash. It was a seed planted in the fertile ground of his desperation. At first he dismissed it as insane, the plot of a bad thriller. But the more he thought about it, the more that insane idea looked like the only rational solution. He began his research subtly, Late at night, he would be on the computer. He read articles about people who had vanished. He studied missing person cases, tides, currents, search and rescue challenges. He researched how to create a new identity, how to live off the grid, which countries had lax extradition laws. The plan moved from fantasy to steps. A boating accident seemed perfect, tragic, common, believable. It offered a reason a body might never be found. He planned every detail. Buy a small, cheap boat. Tell everyone he's taking up fishing to de-stress. Withdraw his remaining cash. Sell off small assets. That planning gave him a sense of purpose, a feeling of control. He was no longer a victim. He was the architect of his own destiny. He was designing his own death. The morbid project consumed his every thought. The man who once built an image of success was now planning its destruction. He prepared to step out of the light and into the shadows, leaving behind a memory and a crafted lie. The days leading up to his disappearance were Patrick's final performance. He played the part of the devoted husband and father with renewed, almost manic energy. He knew these were the last moments he would ever share with his family, and he wanted the memories to be perfect. He took his wife out for a nice dinner, holding her hand across the table, telling her he loved her with an intensity that almost seemed strange. He spent an entire Saturday playing baseball with his son. Every pitch, every catch, a final entry in a closing chapter. He was saying goodbye without saying a word, creating a last, beautiful image for them to hold on to. This performance served a dual purpose. It was a genuine, albeit twisted expression of his love for them, but it was also a crucial part of his plan. He needed to appear normal, even happy. He wanted people to remember him as a man who had everything to live for, making his supposed death all the more tragic and believable. So he smiled, he laughed, he played his part to perfection, all while a cold, calculated plan was ticking away in the back of his mind. He also began to subtly lay the groundwork for his new hobby. He started talking to friends, talking to neighbors, about his newfound passion for fishing. He bought a cheap second-hand fishing rod, some tackle, leaving them in plain sight in his garage for everyone to see. In his private moments, the performance ceased. He was a man on a mission, finalizing the last details of his escape. He emptied the last of his secret bank accounts. He purchased a bus ticket. He packed a single duffel bag with a change of clothes, his cash, and a set of forged identity documents. He was two men at once. The contrast was stark, a testament to the depth of his deception. The day arrived. It was a calm, slightly overcast morning, perfect for his plan. He kissed his wife goodbye, telling her he would be back by lunchtime. He drove his car to the marina and walked toward the small, unremarkable boat he had purchased for this very purpose. To any onlookers, he was just another local heading out for a day on the water. No one gave him a second glance. Once he was far enough from the coast, he began the process of staging the scene. He deliberately tangled the line, making it look like he'd struggled with a big catch. He tossed a half-empty water bottle into the sea. He tossed a sun hat. Small pieces of debris drifted, ready for search parties to find. He made sure there were no signs of a struggle. The scene needed to suggest an accident. Every detail was calculated. He steered the boat back toward a populated stretch of coastline, so it would be found quickly. He checked the fuel. He looked back at the shoreline one last time, a distant, hazy strip on the horizon. With the stage set, he executed his final move. Under the boat's cover, he slipped into a small, inflatable life raft he'd kept hidden. The larger boat chugged away on autopilot. He paddled in the opposite direction toward a pre-planned, deserted stretch of beach. A tiny speck on the vast ocean, paddling away from his old life toward an uncertain future. The sea that was meant to be his grave was actually his escape route. Patrick McDermott was gone. After what felt like an eternity of paddling, his small raft scraped against the sand. He was exhausted, soaked, freezing, but he was alive. He was free. He quickly deflated the raft, buried the raft deep above the high tide line, buried the paddle, leaving no trace. He changed out of wet clothes. Not Patrick McDermott anymore, a nameless shadow, a man without a past. His first steps on solid ground were the first steps of a ghost, a new person born from a watery grave. Move quickly, stay unseen. He'd chosen the landing spot carefully. A little used coastal trail led inland to a highway miles away. He walked for hours, his senses on high alert. A fugitive now, the world felt like a threat. He finally reached the highway as dusk was setting in. He kept his head down, his face obscured by a baseball cap, and walked until he came to a small, dusty bus station in a forgotten town. This was another calculated risk. He paid for his pre-booked ticket with cash. He sat in the back of the bus, staring out the window as the landscape of his old life blurred past him. As the bus rumbled through the night, the reality of what he had done began to sink in. He thought of his wife waking up. He pictured his son learning that his father was lost at sea, but he pushed it down. He had to. There was no room for guilt or regret in this new life. Patrick McDermott felt those things. But Patrick McDermott was dead. He was someone else now. He had to be. While Patrick was on a bus heading towards his new life, the first act of his tragedy was playing out back home. As promised, his boat was discovered. The scene was exactly as he had designed it. The boat was empty, the fishing line tangled, the keys in the ignition. The authorities were called, and a search and rescue operation was launched immediately. Helicopters buzzed over the water, and patrol boats crisscrossed the area. The news reached his wife like a physical blow. Two grim-faced police officers at her door, their words gentle but devastating. Her husband's boat had been found empty. He was missing. The initial shock gave way to a frantic, desperate hope. But as the hours turned into days, that hope began to fade. After a week of fruitless searching, the official operation was called off. Patrick McDermott was officially declared lost at sea, presumed dead. A death certificate was issued. His will was read. His life insurance policies, which he had carefully paid up just before he vanished, were processed. The world was methodically closing the book on Patrick McDermott. His lie had become the official truth. For his family, the lack of a body was a special kind of torture. They held a memorial service on the coast. They mourned a man they believed was a victim of a terrible accident. They had no idea that he was hundreds of miles away watching the news reports, taking his first tentative steps into a life built on the foundations of their pain. The book was closed, but the story was far from over. Patrick McDermott was dead. In his place stood a man named David Harrison, the name on the forged driver's license in his wallet, a name he practiced saying in the mirror until it felt less like a lie. After weeks of drifting, he settled in a small, dusty town in a different state, where no one knew his face and no one asked questions. He rented a small, sparsely furnished apartment above a laundromat. He paid the first few months in cash. That shabby room became his entire world. He found a menial, under-the-table job as a short-order cook in a greasy spoon diner on the edge of town. The work was grueling and the pay minimal. It was cash. No background check, no social security number. He kept his head down. He flipped burgers. He spoke only when necessary. His colleagues knew him only as Dave, the quiet guy. He avoided making friends. He turned down offers for a beer after work. He understood relationships were a liability. Attachments created questions. At night, alone in his small apartment, the silence was deafening. Memories of the life he abandoned rushed back. The crushing weight of his betrayal would settle upon him. He had chosen exile to escape his problems, but he'd only traded one prison for another. The fear of creditors was replaced by the gnawing fear of being discovered. He was now just a shadow, living on the fringes of society, haunted by the ghost of the man he used to be. To survive, David Harrison developed a strict, almost monastic routine. His life became a carefully choreographed dance of avoidance. He woke up before sunrise, walked to the diner using a different route each day, worked his shift in near silence, and walked home. He bought his groceries from a small corner store late at night, always paying in cash, and never making eye contact with the clerk. He became a master of being unseen, of moving through the world without leaving a ripple. He knew that predictability could lead to recognition, so he introduced small, random variations into his daily life. He never established a pattern that could be traced. He lived his life as if he were constantly being watched. Every stranger's glance felt like a potential threat. Every police car that drove by sent his heart racing. He had to consciously unlearn a lifetime of social habits. Every instinct that made him a charming and popular man in his former life was now a danger. He was actively suppressing his own personality, sanding down all the edges that made him unique until he was nothing more than a smooth, blank surface. The psychological strain of this constant performance was immense. He was never able to relax, not for a single moment. He kept a packed go-bag under his bed at all times, ready to flee at a moment's notice. He had escaped the immediate threat of his debts, but he was now a prisoner of his own freedom. He lived in a cage built of fear and paranoia, and he held the only key, but he was too afraid to ever use it. In the modern world, truly disappearing is nearly impossible. Every credit card swipe, every cell phone call, every social media post leaves a digital footprint. Patrick knew this. A core part of his survival strategy was to become a ghost in the machine, to live a life completely offline. He was cut off from the primary way the world now communicates and functions, further deepening his isolation from society. His only connection to the outside world was through the public library's computers. Under the cover of darkness, he would slip into the library. He would scan the local papers for any mention of his family. It was a form of self-torture, a way to peer through a window at a life he could never reclaim. During one of these clandestine sessions, he saw a picture of his son. The boy was older now, a teenager, standing with his high school baseball team. Patrick stared at the pixelated image on the screen, his heart aching with a profound sense of loss. He was a ghost watching his own child grow up from a distance. In that moment, the weight of his decision crashed down on him. He had only robbed his son of a father and himself of the joy of watching him become a man. He started having nightmares, dreaming that his face would suddenly appear on the library computer screen with the word "found" in big red letters. He became convinced that investigators were still looking for him. The very tool he used to feel connected to his past also became a source of his greatest fear. A constant reminder that no matter how deep he hid, he might never be truly safe. Years of living as a ghost began to take a heavy toll on Patrick's psyche. The man he was, confident, charismatic, ambitious Patrick McDermott, was fading away. In his place was the hollowed-out shell of David Harrison. Not a father, not a husband, not a friend. This constant state of negation began to erode his very sense of self. He would sometimes look in the mirror and fail to recognize the tired, fearful man staring back at him. The profound loneliness was a constant, dull ache. He missed the simple things most, the sound of his wife's laughter. He would overhear snippets of normal life from his apartment above the laundromat. Each sound was a painful reminder of everything he had lost. He had chosen this solitude, but he had never understood how completely it would consume him. He had traded the fear of financial ruin for the slow, agonizing death of his own soul. He started talking to himself, imaginary conversations with his wife. He would recount stories to his son. These were the desperate acts of a mind starved of human connection. The line between the character he was playing and the man he once was began to blur, leaving him adrift in a sea of confusion and regret. This psychological decay was, in many ways, a more secure prison than any physical jail. The constant fear and isolation wore him down, making him less sharp, less careful. He was no longer the meticulous planner who had orchestrated a flawless disappearance. He was just a tired, lonely man who wanted the pain to end. The years in the dark had not brought him peace or freedom. They had simply ground him down. He was a shadow, slowly fading. After nearly a decade of living in the shadows, a moment of carelessness threatened to unravel everything. It was a simple, human impulse. A family came in. Father, young son, barely older than Patrick's own boy had been. The boy excitedly told his father about his baseball game. Patrick watched from the kitchen. Nostalgia and grief washed over him. He saw himself and his son in that booth, a perfect memory gone. Forgetting himself for a moment, he stepped out from behind the counter. He approached their table, smiling warmly for the first time in years. The old Patrick McDermott smile, charming, familiar. He talked to the boy about baseball. For 5 minutes, Patrick wasn't David Harrison. He was just a man sharing a friendly moment. A regular at the counter watched. A retired cop who ate there every day. He'd only known Dave as the quiet, brooding cook. The sudden charisma was jarring, out of character. A crack in the carefully built facade. The image lingered in the cop's mind. The man's posture, the way he carried himself, familiar. Like a half-remembered face from a case file. That night, Patrick realized his error. The connection had felt too good, a dangerous indulgence. He berated himself for letting his guard down. Years of invisibility undone by one flash of sentiment. He felt a new, immediate fear. Not abstract paranoia, a chilling surety he'd been seen. The flicker of his past self lit the present, and he feared who had noticed the light. The retired cop, a man named Frank Miller, just couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Dave the cook. The difference between the silent, brooding Dave and the charismatic man who talked baseball with that family was just too vast. It was almost like watching two different people inhabit the same body. The performance had slipped, and Frank was the only one in the audience who noticed. So he started paying closer attention. He observed the way he moved, the way he deliberately avoided eye contact, the way he tensed up whenever a police car drove past. These were the subtle tells of a man with something to hide. It was a puzzle that his old cop brain just couldn't resist trying to solve. Frank began a small, informal investigation of his own. He ran the name David Harrison through some old law enforcement databases. The search came up empty. No driver's license, no credit history, no records of any kind. But to Frank, it was a massive red flag. In the modern world, having no digital or paper trail was a sign of deliberate erasure. The mystery deepened. Frank's curiosity slowly morphed into a quiet obsession. He started taking notes in a small pocket notebook. The times Dave arrived and left work. The different routes he took. The man's deliberate avoidance of any kind of camera. It all pointed to a man on the run. Frank didn't know what this man had done, but he was certain he was a fugitive. Frank felt he was on the verge of uncovering a long-buried secret. The breakthrough came from a place Frank didn't expect. One slow afternoon, he was browsing the internet, scrolling through a website dedicated to cold cases. He clicked on a national database for long-term missing persons. He scrolled through the grainy photos, page after page of faces frozen in time. Then he saw it, a photo from over a decade ago. It was a man named Patrick McDermott, presumed drowned after a boating accident. The photo was old and poor quality. He was smiling with a confidence Dave didn't have, but the eyes were the same. Frank felt a jolt. He pulled up more articles on the disappearance. He read about the failing business, the debts, the life insurance policy. He printed the photo. The next day he went to the diner for his usual lunch. He sat at the counter, heart pounding with excitement and trepidation. He waited for a quiet moment while Dave refilled his coffee. Frank slid the printed photo across the counter, face up next to Dave's hand. He watched. The reaction was immediate. Dave froze. His hand trembled and coffee sloshed over the rim onto the counter. All the color drained from his face. The persona of David Harrison shattered. The haunted, fearful eyes staring at the photo were Patrick McDermott's, confronted with his own ghost. He looked up at Frank, face a mask of pure panic. He didn't have to confess. His reaction was confession enough. The quiet cook, the anonymous man, the ghost who'd lived in shadows for a decade, had been found. The past he'd buried was laid bare on a diner countertop. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of 10 years of lies. Patrick stood there paralyzed. There was nowhere left to run.
I think you and I need to have a talk.
Patrick slowly took off his apron and walked to the booth. The fight had gone out of him. In a strange way, being discovered was almost a relief. He told Frank everything. He spoke of the debts, The fear, the pressure. He described the meticulous planning, the escape, and the creation of his new identity. Frank listened patiently. When the story was finished, there was nothing left to say. The truth was out. Frank knew what he had to do. As a former officer of the law, he couldn't just let it go. There were crimes involved, fraud, to begin with. He left Patrick in the booth and walked to the payphone at the back of the diner. He dropped a coin in the slot and dialed the number for the local police department.
My name is Frank Miller. I'm at the Starlight Diner on Route 4.
You need to send a car. I found a man who's been dead for 10 years. The arrest of Patrick McDermott sent shockwaves through 2 towns. In his adopted home, the quiet man they knew as Dave revealed to be a fugitive. But for his family, the news was an earthquake. The grief they had carried for 10 years, replaced by anger, betrayal. Their husband and father wasn't dead. He had chosen to leave them. The legal consequences were swift. Patrick faced fraud charges for the insurance money, but the true punishment was not prison. His real sentence, the loss of his family. His wife, who mourned him then rebuilt, could not forgive. A chilling cautionary tale about desperation and the seductive illusion of escape. He erased his past and erased his future. He became a ghost in his own life, spectator to time, haunted by family. His plan to die gave him a new life, without love, without connection, without a soul. He ran from his shadow, only to be lost in suffocating darkness. The final, haunting question. Ask yourself, could you live like this for years, a phantom haunted by a life you chose to leave behind? Could you pay the ultimate price for a clean slate? Comment yes or no below.